You look beautiful.
It's been a while you said that to me.
Really?
New cologne?
It's the same one you got me.
The same one I got you? I didn't get him that. Did he get that from another woman? Is he cheating on me? I need to call him.
Margaret Calloway spent 20 years building a name that meant something. It took her husband one forged signature to try to erase it. Before the world ever saw the betrayal, Maggie saw the small things. Late-night calls. A client he wouldn't name. A dress with her label sewn into it, that she never touched. She told herself it was nothing. She was wrong. What she was about to uncover wouldn't just end her marriage. It would expose a plan that had been running underneath her entire life, stitch by stitch, for over a year. This is the story of how she found out, what it cost her to fight back, and how she walked out with more than she ever had before. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By the time she turned 44, Margaret Calloway had spent more hours inside her own atelier than inside her own home. Calloway House sat on a quiet street in Raleigh, North Carolina, a converted textile building with tall windows and good light, the kind of light a designer builds a career chasing. She had built the label from a single sewing machine in a rented room. 20 years later, it had a waiting list 11 months long. Her husband, Theodore Calloway, ran the business side. Ted had a gift for rooms full of money. Investors liked him, bankers liked him, he could make a spreadsheet sound like a love letter. People in Raleigh's design circles used to joke that Maggie made the dresses and Ted made the deals, and for most of their marriage, that arrangement had felt like a partnership instead of a warning. The cracks, when she looks back on them now, were small enough to step over. There was the cologne. A new bottle appeared in his bathroom cabinet one evening in early spring, and when she mentioned she didn't recognize the scent, he told her she'd bought it for him months ago as a gift. She hadn't. She let it go. There was the gala. Calloway House's spring collection had been the centerpiece of the city's biggest charity auction, and afterward, a woman Maggie had never met approached her with tears in her eyes, gesturing at a deep emerald silk gown. "This one," the woman said. "You made this one divine. Who's the lucky woman who gets to wear it?" Maggie smiled the way she always did at compliments she hadn't fully processed yet, and said she'd have to check the order log. She never made that dress. She was almost certain of it. She checked the log that night anyway. There was no record of the commission. No fabric order, no client file, nothing in her own handwriting, and yet the label sewn into the bodice was hers. Her stitch. Her thread count. Her label, on a dress she had never touched. She didn't sleep well that night, though she couldn't have told you exactly why. The next morning, she found Ted in his study, on a call he ended the moment she walked in. When she asked who he'd been speaking with, he told her it was a client. Just business. She asked why a client would need to call him at 6:30 in the morning. He told her she was imagining things, that she'd been working too hard, that the gala had exhausted her more than she realized. She wanted to believe him. For another 6 weeks, she did. It was a colleague who sent her the link, a write-up in a regional fashion trade publication, announcing the debut collection of a new label called Cross and Theory, backed by what the article described only as a private investor with deep ties to the Raleigh fashion scene. Maggie almost didn't click on it. She's grateful, now, that she did. The silhouettes in the lookbook were hers. Not similar to hers. The exact draping technique she'd spent 4 years developing for her bridal line. A signature dart placement she'd never seen another designer use, because she'd never taught it to anyone outside her own studio. Someone hadn't been inspired by Margaret Calloway's work. Someone had copied it, file for file. She went to the launch event herself, unannounced, and found her husband standing beside a woman barely 30, accepting champagne from a passing tray like he belonged there. The woman's name was Vivian Cross. "Welcome to our debut collection," Vivian said when Maggie introduced herself, gesturing at the room with the easy confidence of someone who didn't yet understand who she was talking to. "Stunning, isn't it? Who designed these for you?" Maggie asked. "A very generous investor," Vivian said, and smiled at Ted in a way that told Maggie everything she needed to know, even before Vivian added, almost as an afterthought, "You must be the wife." Maggie remembers very little about the drive home. She remembers Ted trying to explain in the car, something about Vivian being a promising young talent he was mentoring, an investment opportunity, nothing more than that. She remembers telling him, quietly, that she didn't believe a word of it. And she remembers what he said next, the thing that told her this had been planned for longer than a single bad decision: "You trained me, and then you discarded me." Remember? It wasn't an apology. It was a justification. And it confirmed something Maggie had suspected without letting herself name: this wasn't about Vivian Cross at all. This was about a debt Ted believed Maggie owed him, one he intended to collect with her own work. That night, for the first time in 20 years of marriage, Maggie didn't ask Ted another question. She decided, instead, to start watching. There were only 3 people who had ever seen the bridal collection before it launched: Maggie, Ted, and Joanne Whitfield, the seamstress who had worked beside her since the beginning, back when Calloway House was a single rented room and a waiting list of 0. So, when Maggie sat down with the studio's design archive, the actual files, the actual dates, the actual login records, and found that someone had accessed her private design folder from outside the building 3 separate times in the months before the Cross and Theory launch, she didn't think of Jo as a suspect. She thought of her as the only other person who might know the truth. She found her in the back of the studio, steaming a hem, and asked her directly, "When did you last speak to anyone connected to Vivian Cross?" Jo went pale before she answered. And what she told Maggie next was worse than anything Maggie had let herself imagine. Jo had found out weeks earlier. She'd seen Ted in Maggie's private study late one night, logged into Maggie's design archive under Maggie's own credentials only Maggie was supposed to have. Jo hadn't told her because she didn't yet understand what she was looking at, and because some small, loyal part of her hoped she was wrong. "He had your archive," Jo said. "Your home login. Everything. He walked through every room of your life, and he took what he wanted from each one." It got worse from there. Maggie pulled the business filings for Cross and Theory herself, and found her own bridal designs listed in the company's intellectual property registration, not licensed, not borrowed. Filed as original work, under Vivian Cross's name, with a signature on the transfer document that was unmistakably Maggie's own. She had never signed it. A forensic document examiner she hired privately confirmed it within the week: the signature was a forgery, skilled enough to pass casual inspection, careless enough to fail under magnification. And Jo, when shown the document, said the thing that turned Maggie's blood to ice. "It was him," Jo said. "I watched him practice it. I watched him sign your name." Legally, under the filing Ted had pushed through, the bridal collection that had built Calloway House's reputation now belonged, on paper, to another woman. If Maggie fought it publicly and lost, she would look like a bitter wife trying to discredit a young designer. If she fought it quietly, she might never get her name back at all. So, she decided she wouldn't fight loud. She would fight where no one expected her to be looking, and she would do it on her own terms, at the one event Ted couldn't afford for her to miss. There was one more thing Jo had uncovered, almost by accident, while digging through the financial side of the new company. Ted had no intention of staying with Vivian Cross once Cross and Theory launched successfully. There were messages, drafts of a buyout agreement, language that quietly stripped Vivian's ownership stake down to almost nothing the moment the brand hit its first profitable year. Vivian didn't know it yet, but she was being used exactly the way Maggie was being used. The only difference was timing. Maggie sat with that information for 3 days before she decided what to do with it. She found Vivian Cross at her own home, on a Tuesday evening, and didn't bother with pleasantries. "Bold of you, coming to my house uninvited," Vivian said at the door. "I came to give you something," Maggie told her. The whole truth. You can decide what to do with it. She told Vivian everything, the forged signature, the stolen designs, and the buyout language Joe had found, the plan to push her out the moment the brand no longer needed her. Vivian didn't believe it, not at first. She accused Maggie of lying, of trying to destroy something out of jealousy. She called Ted right there in the hallway, expecting him to dismantle every word of it. What she got instead, over the following days, was confirmation. A partner at the firm handling the Cross and Theory paperwork let slip a detail that didn't match what Ted had told Vivian. A forwarded email chain. A late-night argument that ended with Vivian standing in her own kitchen reading a message thread on Ted's phone that spelled out, in his own words, exactly when and how he intended to cut her out. "You wrote every word yourself," Vivian said to him, the night she finally believed it. "Now we both know how betrayal feels." By the time Calloway House's 25th anniversary runway show arrived, 3 people walked into that building each believing they held the only version of the truth that mattered. Only one of them was right. The room was full, every investor who'd ever written Calloway House a check, half the regional press, and Ted, standing near the stage in the navy suit he always wore when he wanted a room to trust him. Maggie had planned this show for over a year, long before any of this began. She decided, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, that she wasn't going to let him take that from her too. She walked the runway herself, between the final 2 looks, and took the microphone before anyone could stop her. "Every gown on this stage, I designed," she told the room. "My husband forged my signature to file the rights to my own work under another company's name. I have the document. I have the forensic analysis. And I have a seamstress who watched him practice my handwriting in my own study." The room didn't move for a long moment. Then it did, phones lifting, a low wave of disbelief rolling toward the exits. And then Maggie did something no one in that room expected, including Ted. "Years ago, before any of you knew my name, I took an idea that wasn't mine," she said. "A design that made me famous. It came from a seamstress who never got credit for it, because I let people believe it was mine alone. I've carried that. Tonight, every lie loses its power in this room, including mine." It wasn't an excuse for what had been done to her. It was the thing that made the rest of it land, a woman willing to hold herself accountable in the same breath she held someone else accountable, in front of every person whose money was about to walk out the door. And it did walk. 3 investors left in the first minute. By the time Ted reached her at the edge of the stage, the room had thinned to a handful of stragglers checking their phones for cars. "The company can't survive this," he said. "Your name on it, gone. But we could rebuild. Just you and me." "There is no we," Maggie told him. There never really was. Vivian found her an hour later, after most of the room had emptied, and said the only honest thing she had left, she hadn't known about the buyout until Maggie told her, but she'd known, on some level, that nothing with Ted had ever really been about her. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She didn't expect any. She just wanted Maggie to know that whatever came next, it wouldn't include either of them being used the same way twice. It took 4 months to legally reverse the forged filing. The forensic signature analysis, combined with Joe's account and the access logs from Maggie's own archive, made the case straightforward once it reached the right attorney. Cross and Theory dissolved within the year. Vivian Cross relocated out of state and, as far as Maggie knows, started designing again under her own name, with no partners and no investors with deep ties to anyone. Ted kept the house. Maggie didn't want it. What she rebuilt smaller at first, a studio half the size of the old one, a waiting list that started at 0 again, exactly where Calloway House had started 2 decades earlier. Joe came with her. So did almost every client who'd ever sat in Maggie's old studio and watched her work. Margaret Calloway spent 20 years building a name that meant something. It took her husband one forged signature to try to erase it. It took her one truth, spoken out loud, in a room full of people who could have looked away, to take it all back, multiplied into something even her old life never gave her.
How do you feel? Lighter. I lost a husband. I found my whole self and I'm happy and satisfied. Congratulations.
Margaret Calloway spent 20 years building a name that meant something. It took her husband one forged signature to try to erase it. It took her one truth, spoken out loud, in a room full of people who could have looked away, to take it all back, multiplied into something even her old life never gave her. If this story moved you, give it a like. It really helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Maggie's place? And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.